I think to get started, we'll do just a little bit more review from the first session, and then we'll start talking more about neurodegeneration and Alzheimer's disease.
And 정말 주pebatastles 자투 용요 베로이스 아내가 수 다다 고마칭이라야 아니 되게는 가수 가리 트리어 메테 콜라 찬찬 지제 되게 제라는 가수게 왕사기 냠친다 아니 자임을 내 그런 것도 지인스.
With our last question that was asked in the previous session, I think we already got a nice recap of some of the main points from session 1. And I also have just one slide that I'll go through so that we can talk about all these different pieces and parts and how they're connected to one another.
So
this is, well, similar to last time. I ask you to choose one golden nugget, but this time I have 4. The first one is saying, reminding us that the glymphatic system transports amyloid beta out of the brain more quickly during sleep as opposed to when we're awake. We also talked about how it's not all kinds of amyloid beta, or it's not all forms of amyloid beta that are associated with disease. It's specifically accumulation of the amyloid beta fibrils or plaques that is associated with neuron degeneration and Alzheimer's disease.
Amyloid beta ko rizama nasati tan do mepa ne te na ne hapartu ne nyagma thamo ta ya na nga su tani ke number yu ko ne Alzheimer ge na tan do yu ba ne wangsa nyamchin tan do yu ba ti nutritious.
And you all also provided a good background on melatonin. And we have the new information that melatonin is actually able to prevent amyloid beta from turning into those fibrils or plaques.
Melatonin kolaya ne mama shijugiti children of which is constant and the thing along as shisha savaji karayores na melatonin ye ne amyloid beta thing matamotayana training jualing gokuyores.
So since melatonin is released at night and helps sleep, we're starting to see all these connections between melatonin, amyloid beta, sleep, and maybe Alzheimer's disease.
And the melatonin teacher on Samugutis, London Chigio, and then I saw the melatonin down the Dangasuga near down the net and that or amyloid beta or what the down the net and that Alzheimer native parogia, and in Java can do mete answer tagians.
So here we are in session 2. And as I mentioned, the focus of this session will be talking more in depth about neurodegeneration and Alzheimer's disease. And before, it was mentioned that we could do a study that would be looking at some of the connections between the 2 forms of amyloid beta and the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, such as memory loss. And this is important because if we are ever thinking of studying a disease and how to study that disease, we first need to know what the disease actually is. How is that disease defined?
that kitchen which have got is cultural and getting us so get not such good toxicity to a ton, not such career letting you made it toxic to your planet, Homatilang as so NASA Karimba Tanta, NASA take it on Sinton, NASA taking Treshit, tamponing Nibu is.
So we've been talking a lot about scientific method. We've been talking about observations, and we've been talking about hypotheses. And this, so I think this is also related to the last question we left off with. But in the paper that we've been discussing, and that it's been the foundation for all of our sessions together, the hypothesis that they're making there is that it is selection for short sleeping time may have made humans more susceptible to Alzheimer's disease.
That thing at so that something that that so shisha sagi some new de la shinjuku changi de ta by na ko that shisha de karisena me na ni da ko ni tong a chi ku yo wa ni tong tong ni ge tin tong tong da ba de ge ani me la na Alzheimer ne tin jong hawa zu yu ge yu ma sa de ko tiris.
The question that we had at the end of the last session was asking whether this is the case. And so since this is the hypothesis we're discussing in this section, I'm going to sort of ask the question back to you, and we'll have to determine collectively, do we think this is the case? Because right now it's a hypothesis.
Toachi Tongoro, the Dadoni, not the Inamena say Toach Tongoro, is Nabalaya, any Natsugi and the Troati and Chechula Tong the Tang, Nepo Tinaroji Inamena say Tipo, Nebons, Canado, you missed against.
Because up until this point, we've been talking about all the background information that we needed to bring us to this session where now we're ready to really evaluate this evidence for ourselves and see, what do we think? Is there evidence to support this hypothesis?
That and I pardon as with Nathan Data David Jungish that in its Mambochu Kutuchi or is that and I Nasukachi in Sena Nit Mambochu Kutuchi but data that then they did Samanyam to kill by na that and then also with the electricity to shop de la ya, the Japchi chicken doing the Titarians.
All right, as I mentioned, and as we talked about earlier, we first need to know what exactly is Alzheimer's disease before we are going to be able to talk about how it's caused. The first point here was mentioned before, and that is that one of the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease is having problems with memory, and specifically there's trouble with short-term memory. So this means that someone with Alzheimer's disease might be able to remember something that happened many years ago, but something that happened last week would be difficult to remember. The other two characteristics of Alzheimer's disease that are listed here they're more related to the neurons rather than like the behavior of a person. And this is that in Alzheimer's disease, there will often be a loss of the synapses. And so these are the connections between neurons. And there will even be death of specific groups of neurons.
왕자 당 왕자 바로 같은 삼지어와 tumsamti 라드야 다 영나 현다 영가리오레스나 왕자게 된신 시도 바지네 그 시도야 저와 젤메 프차저와 디 차그레스.
So this is going to be another opportunity for you to use the cards that you have. So the cards that have A, B, C, and D on them.
단다 데라야 쳇술라 단다 A B C D 사게 선타쟁 거 쇼고지와 뜻배시 동아이기다. 네 고급주대인스.
And for this one, I'll just ask you, and I can count like I did last time, but the question is just to be to select which of these brain images you think is a brain of someone who had Alzheimer's disease.
다시랑 그디가 벌게 떨었다 봐야나 A B C D 다 봐야나 벌 간기 지 안에 Alzheimer's 내 유주기 미기 레파가 브레인사리스.
So I'll give a minute so we can look at them, think about it, and then I'll count down soon.
Perla ta ni samlu ji tang ji la ne yu mai gi ko patriens.
All right, so I'll count to 3 and then, oh, some of them are starting. But we'll do 1, 2, 3.
We have D and C.
D and C. Okay, were there any A's or B's or everyone's got C and D?
We have more D and less C.
Okay. Excellent. So this one, it was a little, not really a trick, but a little bit is actually there are 2 correct answers. Both C and D are brains from an Alzheimer's patient.
네 단다이 가서 코트라 렌라야 티스 중고녀라스타 예스 나데 가서 맨나 트로에 디바니요 예스라 니샤데 단다 세단 데니차 니트원 디바 렌티 디바 예스 나데 차 아니 데 사이먼 네 유튜브 미기라 파퍼레스.
And can someone share your reasoning? Why did you choose either C or D as opposed to A or B?
다들 진짜 애단 비드네 담도 세단 드리드네 담샤스 진생 가리치나 대치 뭐 저치나다 아스미시게.
루가 개바.
메디 디다멘 가르세디간라 아저 단단 나자 디켄가네 완자 망부지 시도요다 냠고도요 시도 체장디 차창면 어디다미스.
I chose D because of the disease. Alzheimer's disease, you have mentioned that death of certain group of neurons, so that's why I chose D.
Yeah, and I mean, I think D is an especially good example because if you do a comparison of B to D, it looks very, very different. You can see that there must have been a lot of neuronal death to produce what we're seeing in D. So yeah, good reason. And how about someone that chose C? What was your reason for choosing C?
가시지가 세단 위진sen 카리인스.
루가 ngapa.
먼저 라우당이 시데메로. 시데메 김전 갈라나 된다 경기 알즈만 나자 여교대 김전직대 가서 된다. 원자의 투점대 갈라오리 교차를 라오리 dinner 순서 매바사그레스 먼저 투점대 어디 김전기다 된다 실라타바이나 디 레바데 갈라오 답직대 테스 딘 파라라 동바도 딘드 투점 테스 교웨 인사레 섬스.
I chose C because you have mentioned that the loss of synapses in the case of Alzheimer's disease, over here we see a gap between the folds of the brain, and we see that there's less of synapses, loss of synapses in this case.
Okay. Yeah, and so some of the loss of synapses would be very small. You would need a microscope to see some of that loss of synapses. But still the idea, right, that we see these gaps, we see that there must be like the loss of neurons between A and C is true. Yeah.
Those what I took one second lava in the load again, Mana Kashi, and it did us with that. Tonyalang to Taton Chisho or Mikongwe, Tagwet in the racing by Nayan, that the cups 8 on Sin Chatruba in Bana, and a Sutan lava down on Takachi Maple with that, Shugu Paru, which we champion patit modus.
Yeah, actually, any questions about this before we go to the next?
I'm a matter when I try is the Pola.
Oh, Gindo.
Oh,
Wangza Tuzum Lager Lara, that Alzheimer Lady Sumba.
very.
Tana the Sila Tawayana, the Leba Kapsan, the Kalor, Leba Tatamu Megadosto.
Very.
On year somebody this summer. In the Alzheimer Naza de Tembanyam Jongi, the Nindoshi race Sido Nazade. Into Temba than Dewa in Leve Sagu Chetapaji on the Dewa Yudo Chapora.
Very.
Dindu on the Candenas.
So, yeah, yes, you had mentioned that Alzheimer's disease is connected with the loss of synapses and also death of certain neurons. But over here we see like in case of COD, we see like loosely packed brain matters in these cases. And when we talk about memory loss or like the problem in short memories, we usually talk about a certain part of brain, a specific part of brain. So is it the case or just whole part of the brain is affected?
Yeah. So I mean, that's a great question. And it sounds like it's connecting up with probably some of the neuroscience lessons that we have had. I would agree. It's death of a specific set of neurons is known to be associated with Alzheimer's disease. And here, as you mentioned, it seems in a lot of locations that we're seeing this death of neurons. So I think my understanding of it is that it's starting with this specific set of neurons, but eventually as the disease is progressing and getting worse and worse, that's what would result in the brains that we're seeing here. So these brains are probably from people that had a very like advanced stage of Alzheimer's. It wouldn't be right at the beginning.
That the Joya Budus and the Dilhapper the young also wants a Henry would Lamson Chirabata and also the Lepagachashita Kangichi one. Jambatan Joy make me touch or what they don't do Yadus, but then they come seen by Nasuge. Pretty Latava in Bana, Chetange, ne and Tanda Simon Nati, Nayon pickups, ne Tangbong goods to Sateko, one side of Tinsam Tan Laya Dan, Tane, one side of Tinson Cheta by Chick pushing to a net on the Jungu is. In by Nayan, Tanda Simon Ned data ko Nimba Chava in Bana, Junior Buddhism grow by Bana, and you could get under Chetapan and goods by data, Remshinter, and in Asugia. Lepagi chashi kanzala ya chabia gi netan tingu res istambala tandanga su tela ya taya gi per data ani ko Alzheimer gi nete ani jun jangbo chi la na ji ani ne nyampa chaju mi gi lepa pertine res.
Anything else?
Jamba ayos
Ruga Nibat.
The Degeneration also hippocampus in a Chiclo do I guess the Sotama. Demba Nyasa Chia the Sotamara. The Sotama in some Alzheimer ge ne Naking Gansa digi and a Sotama Yabos Yobina and digi Jambala King Gapsa Marva. The day you can Majab into Europe. Alzheimer Nasana and a Sotama Yabo you can.
That's all. Usually like memory is connected with the hippocampus and is there any cases where a person has Alzheimer's disease but has a really good hippocampus?
Oh, this is a good question. I will, Jillian, I just saw you pop up. Do you have anything to add to this? Because I'm not a brain expert.
Yeah, hi, Tasha Dilek. Good evening, good morning. So I just got in and I heard the question is, are there cases where someone has Alzheimer's, but their hippocampus is intact?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So most cases of Alzheimer's, we don't know what the brain looks like until after. So usually after the person has died. And so we can look at it. And by that time, the damage is usually so global. It happens across the whole brain that there is usually damage in the hippocampus. But in earlier stages of Alzheimer's, the hippocampus starts to have some damage, you can see it, but there are plaques and tangles just throughout most of the brain. And so definitely in the limbic system or the hippocampus, but throughout the rest of the brain, there are plaques and tangles.
수순 집이가 값스다 덕시 그요 말와 그 미디 좀 잔우 질라니 레바 버자던 되게 내탄 영스탄발라 아니 디 값스다 정말 잡대요 레스티 값이 연고 그 캠퍼스다 더 톨러도 사와 저기나 가속에다 나차디 당 구주비네 값텔라야 아니 그 단다게 쳤다 말아야 아니 그 준치에 받아 아니 진메세 점신등 가속에 레바 차시 현달라 당 가속에 Tangiki Chashichuro, the Tangi Tangi, Topo Bozimacho, Tangi Nabate, Noko Lepagi Chashiman, Shishula Kale, which have to be race.
Great. So I think you got here just in time to answer that question. So I think if there's maybe one more question that we can take now, and of course we'll have time later. But if there's any additional questions about this part.
That didn't draw your by net draw cheat and the Lena Dictus, the manner of so.
Oh, Diwachi Shuchovache, Diwachi Shuchovache.
So one more question.
Alzheimer ki ne sai chi do. Ko demba dang dewa yu ko nasa chi re do.
Yeah.
Nye dewa kai se na nganzo chi ki namjue dang riglam dang chi theri tinso jang majang ki to ne. Sheja jang majang ki to ne. Alzheimer ki ne di chungma chungla kebar togyo mares. Di intiwa.
So his question is because Alzheimer's disease is related with our memory. So does someone's education in the field of like science, of logic, whatever he studies, the person studies, his education, the training in some sort of educational field, will that affect the possibility of having Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, so I think this is
you want me to take this one too, Kelsey?
You should start. Yeah, if I think it's something to add, then I will. Go ahead, please.
Okay. So what they have shown is that more years of education, it doesn't matter in what, but more education gives you a longer time before the problems start showing up. So it doesn't change whether or not you end up getting Alzheimer's, but what your symptoms tend to be more delayed because I'll give an analogy. It's sort of like if you have a well that is full, you can draw more out of the well before you hit the bottom and start getting into the dirt. But if there's not much in there, then very soon you start drawing from the well and very soon you're in the murky part. So the education or new experiences and learning really changes how long you get before the problems start to show up, but it doesn't change whether or not you will end up with Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's disease the neti jong manjong ti tachi chegio mari simana kari tachi gresene choronge shiyun jamba de shiyun kari jamba imba na yang shiyun ge jun ringlo chi jang sa choro jun ring che de ge 아니 그 네트워크 지원을 정도 치란 정세 때라야 수신되게 스케트 줄로 준랑보치라 열objon 야고 치요 파인바나 단다 자메 네기 네타티 존티스 존아티스 제라야 정고요 바로와 니스탄바다야 데다 정고요 스타팅 아주 비춘치 샤바인바나 가속에 지금 다 디너로 지금 바나 다 출란사기 증부로 지요 파인바니 게데 초롱게 추기 증부나라야 추칸데요 파이나 네 초롱게 추디 램바이나 준랑보라야요 타마탄 담보나 마투버도 주증는 추디 망보라야요 네게데 담보 코시데 메바인바나 정보조보 차지 사긴 담들 투그와 디나신데 스탄다 네 롭존티 준랑보다 거기 롭존게 내라야 제베메 같이 준랑보 제바인바이나 네 단다가 나차티 기 네타tin 종아기 아니 군종 치아요레스.
Great, thank you. And so I'll go to the next slide, but please do keep in questions, and especially while we have Dr. Hugh here with us. I know sometimes more about the molecules than the whole brain itself.
단다 저의 바이나 메트 당당치나 디제스 단다가 산 티가사 기긴 체모 후다다 도아 게라이 바이나 단다 왕사 생리게 지위기네 당라 네고 첸토야고요레스 네 나라인 바이나 쳇던고 네 차봉네 바블라야 고간도 차봉다 네 디두네 바바 에 하고예스 네 저에나 당당치나 디제스 네 단다가 숨메트 투예스
Hello.
Yes.
You have a question?
So, so before, the Alzheimer disease is related with the loss of some neurosynapses. So I really wondering, are there specific neurosynapses when lost during the Alzheimer disease?
Okay, and so you're asking about if there's
yes. The one says, it's a loss of neuron synapses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just wondering, are there specific neuron synapses?
Okay.
In general, yes.
Yeah. I can start, and then also if you want to join in too. So I think for this, it would probably be related to what we talked about with the neuron death more generally, is that by the time we're able to really study these brains, the disease has progressed pretty far. But it is possible that at the beginning of disease, it is specific neurons that are more affected than others. And so I guess maybe we can say that, and then Dr. Hugh, if you want to add something about that too.
That Tuatica also assignment Sadi Chombaina, assignment Tambanyam to Chombaina, and in Tichiguris, around also Chigambanyam do or at the Capsa, and once I get something loud, once I get something chili lagu or once I get some chirapat in a lagu race, or that the Tuater, the Lente, Tangasoge. That taxi because in by Natako, that Tanji Mitron Sanu Jelachi Capso, that the Lepaganzalation Chigua, in Benayan, for that Tandage Alzheimer net the tampon goods pickups in Bana, and a co once a Chirabata, and a co with some Chirabala, Chishuchente Chiongo, but in series.
And is there anything to add?
George die.
The
dish to anzo the tege amyloid karsa better or this to dico dodo chegi jutso reading in the chet uyana tanda patta mai jo kogojeno ko sobajene digda sobajene denene anzo tanda Alzheimer nasa ani enjoy your senge gitu sunsa tindi dico sobajene de tanda karse or classical chord plaques to or di chegi Guzo de melatonin neurodroina and Simba Candidazina.
His question is about the causes of the condensed or like cord plague. Were you or the scientists, the community, able to recognize the cause of this condensation of the amyloid beta, because you have mentioned that only in this form when they just come together to form that fibril, or like this in this plaque form, it causes Alzheimer's disease. Were you able to identify the cause? Because sometimes earlier you have mentioned that melatonin will help or prevent the amyloid beta becoming fibril. So, is there any cause that were recognized in this case?
Yeah. So for these, similar to the idea we were talking about before, is there are often a lot of factors that contribute to it. And so with this, I guess I'm thinking of there can be a lot of factors that are sort of causing it or leading plaques to form. And as with this melatonin example, there can also be several things that sort of prevent the formation or protect from the formation of the plaques. And for this, I don't necessarily know all of the different factors that have been tested, but if we are thinking about the experimental design for how someone might test these to see if the plaque is forming more or less, is we can hypothesize the different factors that would affect plaque formation either way, making it more or less, and we could add those into the experiment. Or we can take them out. That's the general approach that we would use for testing this.
ni question kagi kuge ta shucho chi lu kagi chigum du sa te zo yang atsu ge tashi chango na tu shana digres.
Yes, and any other questions? That question actually mostly addressed everything we wanted to talk about with this slide. But anything additional related to the plaques and Alzheimer's disease?
Tanda dege ko twa dege tanda dega la tensha ju dege na dan de man chi no chi motor che sonswa ni shenda chi zu tanda ani tani ke number yu ba de da ani Alzheimer in nege paro lo yu ju de ta tan de vi ko ni ya twa shen ba yu
o ge twa chi ju cho che ani chi dang nam ju nga zo ji ani semyon che ni mi le ba de dang ane semyon me ken da mi ji namju ane lolo de degengi ane mi leba ngi gi bala ane Alzheimer gi necha jungwe sicha de la khabar dawji yore yo ma re shwen ro ane danda jidang Alzheimer gi na sa de yogen ji na ane yunjin temba de la kangal tang ane wangse tucham lak ba dang de ne wangsa chetak ba ji shi do re sung do di indo Alzheimer ki necha jungwe ken gyudang ken daw ji gare re shwe.
Is there any kind of difference between people who has a really emotional disturbance or emotional ups and downs in life, and the person who is more calm or settled? Is there any kind of difference of the susceptibility of getting the Alzheimer's disease in those two different groups? Also, with this, you have mentioned about like the loss of short mamemory, a problem with short memory, loss of synapses of this, and what is the main cause of Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two questions embedded within this one. And so the first thing that was mentioned was some about sort of maybe having like an emotional disturbance and how that might connect up to this. And so I think I'm going to put forth a little bit of something to consider and ask a question back to you all. So maybe it's not necessarily known the direct connection of emotional disturbance and Alzheimer's disease, but there's some other factors that we can consider.
다단당이 데라야 지기션이 레세 지잡지 되게 제라야 저 트라치마 당기 인스탄다 아니 고가스 그래 카툴라다 나쪽에 생명진스고라다 삼바데 디스 생명진스나 삼바데 지가 델람바 마크바스 보라티라게 네탄데다 아니 디게 콜라야 저와디 슈디 템바데 요마레 심바나야 고체만 보여그레스.
And so the question that I'm going to ask you all is you'll have a discussion with each other about how we might test this, because I think you're asking a lot of great questions that are really leading to experiments that would be beneficial to do.
아니 단다 치솔 트위터지에 고게적이 인스타 저와 대달라 저와 대나라고라 치속에 네 다시 전고 지바이나 다시 전고 간으로 지사레스.
And for this, as you talk about it within your team, thinking about how you might test whether someone's emotions and emotional regulation might connect with Alzheimer's disease, is to also consider the role of sleep, which is something we have been talking about in our session.
단다 치속에 루카나네 다시 갑스와 이마속에 미치게 삼게 네바치고와다 생명게 네바 지털은 바마투바 투바 되게 가서 상mer게 나사텔라야 아니 그 저와 간으로 지치그레 스텔라야 지그 말에서 티콜라 아니 지 트위터 지비 갑스 네 삼르나라야 당게 메라 가서게 나한테 상을 내대다야 아니게 콜라야 디스토지 지셔요 아니게 콜이야 삼을 당지 내단데 지저 트위터 나라야 네 지금 보고 닐라테네 지금 추진 용명 그냥 트위터 지는 디그레스.
So just again, we'll have a few minutes to discuss, and then we'll hear from a few teams, because this is another case. There's not one set right answer. There's lots of possibilities for how this could be studied.
한다다데 안셔서 트위터지는 제라 가마 카시지랑나 트위터지는 제라야 딘세 카치라야 도스 지금 기재시기 지금 그게 인스와 아니 대양 대양 속에 딱시기 남바치고 전데라 그 대트레 디만두바레스 나 요마레스 콜라 도시 지역이 지탑 그래서 나츠바 망보요레스.
Short-term memory loss. Simla kangi yuna da ni ma shwe da ngazo ha gora. Da melatonin da konto teka jaw gitu de lasi. Lama sun da ngazo ta pa tiro. Ni ko mela ni ma ko le yin yo melatonin ji ko mare la ni lasa mo. Mara te nyu te tenge. Mata ni ngazo se nam gi le le wo da kan ka yi do. Kangi yora ji. Yore ma. Te ka tenjir chi ta. Tenjir chi yora. Ra. Ju tenjir chi na. Ile kan la do. Chu chu te ma bo. Ade na ka de la do. Dalla house final gangla. Ni sapata ni sapata ni ko la tanto tigera. Melatonin twengi dire melatonin kada tonga ta gopa la tanto sigora. Kago marda. Jongor ko. Ni cha sigre sapata ko ni cha ditso na to no to tanto. Marda glands da gland di melatonin produce sigorda. Produce sigorda pola produce shela da. Produce shela da. Mare, ಅದು ಗ್ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಜೀರಾ ಗ್ಲ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಜೀರಾ ಸಿಗೋಲ್ಲ ಒಮ್ಮೆ ಮಾತು ತಗೊಳ್ಳ ಒಮ್ಮೆ ತೇಲ್ಲ ರಾಯ ಒದಕಿ ಚಿಕ್ಕ ಅವರ ಒದಕಿ ತಗದಲ್ಲಿನ ಕೊತ್ತೆ ಹೋರಿ
Sounds like there's lots of good discussion. So if it's still ongoing, that's awesome. And whenever someone's ready to share ideas, and we'll build off together, we can share as well.
Abudu de Shas, and method to the genetic tools, no, Paratela, to the Chidete, and Sonia, sonatic tools.
Other than the singing young the minging paro any tembala taji chains, tembataji kind of singing lana, and a catch a sunjus chicken alole, chala chongas to turns any digi me the colorta, juchins, the knee. Me the singing young telea me digi me new and juguyana, ani the singing the carsa singing the ani than the Nasa Jora, Tini Balon enjoy but the patient she to the resource of those.
All right. because this disease is related to associated with the short-term memory, we will do a quick test for people who has like emotional disturbance and the people who don't have. For like, we will show about 15 pictures or like items in within 30 seconds. And we will see who can memorize, who can remember, and how many they can remember. With that test, we can just see if this is related to Alzheimer's disease or memory loss, or it is related, this diseases or this memory problems related with emotional disturbance or not.
Okay, so I really like the specific detail that you know the number of pictures that you want to show them to sort of test the memory. And I also have a clarifying question for this team about their experimental groups. And so is your idea that you would have one group of people who sort of have an emotional disturbance and you'll test their memory, and there's a different group of people who don't have an emotional disturbance and you're going to test their memory and then compare? Is that right?
Densen chigdelaya sambadu helen matunu with densen chig disturbance you say densen chiglaya and it taxi ni yanko sambadu helen bab kuni with us some new on the chicken yokta something the message densen chigla taxi tanda taxi chicken said the chitty jela kurani tremble the answer ways.
Oh, really?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then in this case, would your plan be to is it part of the study that you would sort of do something to cause an emotional disturbance, or are you going to just sort of find people that maybe already have one and then include them in your study?
Yana samba two then with Chig Vincent Tambone Kura two debati Zegim.
True, they will change the carsa the taji chase to a no cortisol at you meet than a chase to those change.
All right. We will find a group who already has this emotional disturbance, because we can check that through the cortisol level in the blood. So that way we can see if they have emotional disturbance or not.
Okay, so I think this also has the interesting component of using a biomarker such as cortisol.
biomarkers
And so the reason I wanted to ask that question is it tells us about the different factors that we need to consider, because it's possible we would have sort of matched people come into the study and then we create an emotional disturbance for some and not the others. And that would be kind of a controlled experiment.
Ani chi samba tuki chiga tang den chile samba tuk ma che che taksi tna ro chi che ba imba na de kapsu imba na ne tang te kapsu nga chu ge taksi te yang te sko yang ta tang zin chi chun zin chi wi ge taksi chi cha ge res.
We could also do the design that we've mentioned here and sort of find different groups of people and bring them in. In that case, we would just want to keep in mind that there's the possibility of additional factors influencing the results. So we wouldn't be able to know for sure that it was only an emotional disturbance that was affecting the memory. Maybe there's another factor in their lives that was influencing the outcome.
Yeah, shenda chikar sana kete nga su beta tampo ne samba thu de chu tinda din sin chi tu se chi yong bai na ane ti kap se yang ko samba thu ya gi ta tanda nga su temba chi ga ta tanda de ta go ra temba la chen je go ro ti kap se ande la ya shu chen chi ya de ane samba thu de sa mai ba nga su ha ko ma ro ji chin ma po chi la ko rong gi tam si zo ro pi kap se ge ne tan dram da gi chen dram da chi la ten ta ya nga su temba la ya shu chen ba ti na yong se gi res.
And then let's hear another idea, because there's a lot of possibilities here.
Da shenda chike yang chi son ro ji das. 고금도
사대기 저와 타마지와 나 심기 망아 용겐들라 아니 알츠하이머 나자디 안 중치와 요 말래 저 유미 디기 아니 저와들라 렌지 게 탑지 제인스 사디 아니 중시바디 시자디 망아 두스 아인스나 단다디 심기 망아 용겐들라 아니 코에기 강에디 치와 용구 두스 니 코에디 강에 지점 치와 요나 대점기 아니 멜라토닌 단다 민지죠 텔레기 아니 용아 요레스 이 지점 용아 요바 티시기 안세데 가르사 에뮬레이트 배틀 해줘 티기 아니 냥마차면 네버 교월 아니 고버 첼레는 고긴 치킨디 멜라토닌 레도 그래서 아니 kunyi 대화 친구 두스
So we want to answer the question that we have asked: is does emotional disturbance will that have a higher susceptibility of having Alzheimer's disease? And we think yes, because when we talk about the emotional disturbance, that affect our sleep. And if you sleep less, the secretion of melatonin will go down, and that will, because one of its functions is to prevent amyloid beta turning into fibrin. So when we go into that all connected relationships, the possibility of having Alzheimer's disease for emotional disturbance is higher. It is possible.
Okay, yeah. And so I think that whole sequence is really showing the connections between the different things that we've talked about so far in our sessions. And I'm curious, among all those different connections that you just mentioned, did your team talk about testing any particular one? Because you might test the connection between emotional disturbance and sleep, or maybe you want to test something with amyloid beta. I'm just curious if there were any sort of experiments that you had a chance to
do. Question mambuchigorwa tanda de la ya chashimas mambuchigorwa de na cheta chila ya takshechi insege nichu Twitter tinda johnson is pichashana December 2 de bateta ani ni baro yin jawa do chigorwa de la tashi yana nga semala beta ge ando tanda chu ge takshechi chigorwa nenda yanko mixe cheta ba de la ya takshechi ge keche de johnson is
tadi misi shimso shida chumas ine tanda gangi tanda melatonin khorangi kijish do melatonin khorangi tanda digi ani karsa amyloid beta di an nyangma thame ne bole kyo gobar chigri la shi do ki ta chimju chedan di yang yang az kyerde yang des seri ki thalon rodan shi do ki ran la kyerde yang di demba yimin tana ani ngazo di sicha di chawa yimba di ngazo dus nyamship chi che dus la yin.
Yeah, we didn't specifically or elaborately talked about that, but this one of the points you have mentioned is the one of the function of melatonin is to prevent amyloid beta turning into fibril. So we can do a scientific repeated research to check if that is the case. So if it is really the case, so there's more possibility of having Alzheimer's disease.
Okay. Yeah, I think that these are, all really great points. And I think I'll just maybe add one more to this discussion if there's a question, that's okay. But as we've been talking, so I got curious about this and I did a quick search online to see what studies have been done related to this topic. And I found several. And I think one that I want to point out, because it's related to something that several of you have brought up, is there actually was a study done on the effects of light from the computer screen and emotional regulation and the effects of that on melatonin production.
Taking a sugi any carsa, Samyon de Tanzanchiala, shooting courage to be metan, telatene, and a melatonin loyach or tela shooting courage to make Elayat or Sichas.
And one other thing I found that was interesting is so we've been kind of talking about the effect that emotions might have on the production of melatonin. And there's also been a study done on the effects of melatonin and how that might influence emotional regulation. So this is an interesting idea because it's showing that there can actually be this interaction between the two. And then just one more, and I'll do a quick screen share so you can see the journal for this one. But there is this journal and it's called Current Alzheimer Research.
And
in this study, they're looking at the effects of light exposure on emotions and sleep and melatonin production in patients with severe Alzheimer's disease.
단다 데이터 조대 고스 탁세제 데로와 단다가 소비 니마고 또왜 추천부 요바나 되게 아니 생명라 식진 가르치고 요메다 근데 니다 아니 멜라토닌 런던라 식진 가르치고 요메다 조대 탁세제 사태 단다 사이머가 나서 유니게와 아니 네바가 탁세제 주레스.
And so this is just to say, these are all fantastic questions, and this really is related to the ongoing and current research that's happening.
한다단데 지와당 지수 공수 성주 섬 배야 어두스 단다 지수 성주 당 좋아도 참아 단당아서 단대게 니캅텔라야 사메게 나차당 제위기 다 딱시 듭당 드심바와 대답당 되어이도스.
And so I realize now this started as a two-part question, and then we really focused on the first part. I'm not sure that I remember the second part of the original question. So if someone wants to re-ask it, or it might have already been addressed, I'm not sure, but I realize I forgot the second part of the question.
tampongaso trans tambalaya tuachiga nambani tua niyo pingula triba instantanga smash shitwa tampote ganlaya desons ne tua nibate kare ni temba jeshas ne chezo teno ne tua nibate kare ni tenyi tena dois.
Okay, so I think maybe, or if there's remaining questions, or maybe it was covered, yeah.
Tagi tuangi de tagi he sindeji phabshaya. Tene ni ki kola ta ani de Alzheimer disease ni kola ni dewa tae dila ani kanire so de tuangi bod suringi bod dirish.
All right. I've taken a notes about the questions earlier. So the second question is, what is the relationship between sleep and Alzheimer's disease?
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for taking those notes.
Awesome, to teachers.
And so that actually, I'm going to go back to the slide now because my goal now is for us to really bring all these different concepts together so we can look at them at the same time and see how they're connected. And this, so what I'll be sharing, it's sort of my version of this diagram that I had mentioned to you before, that you can make this kind of diagram to really see the connections between these different ideas. And just to note, sort of from the perspective of, as you are preparing to teach your science classes, this can be something that's helpful to do. You can sort of prompt your students to make their own diagram like this, and sort of as the summary, maybe at the end of a lesson, it can be helpful to provide this so that it's really clear how everything relates to one another.
Zentana kari cheba tegi ani tanda nimbo te kanado chi mentan data parola jawa kanado chi temba imbaina ani ko kan zentana chichu te ani khasse tam ko de gane ni chi khasse chagres.
So what we see here, this is that picture of the amyloid beta plaques. And there's a little arrow showing that when we have these amyloid beta plaques, then that is something that's going to contribute to Alzheimer's disease.
Amyloid beta the anitanda tonic in Nambala Patirwa, the wall I and touched to what they cut them for Senate de Latinidate, and Matsugi, the Alzheimer in the 10 years.
We have also talked about several other factors that are then all going to be related to these amyloid beta plaques.
That and the Anatsugi and the amyloid beta turning data draw you uncle
And so now in this diagram, this is a way of responding to the question about the connections between sleep and Alzheimer's disease.
That and the Matsugi Alzheimer parola joke
And so here I will note what I'm putting up here. This is meant to be the evidence that's presented in this paper. And it's up to us to evaluate this and see if this is sufficient evidence to really show a connection between sleep and Alzheimer's disease. So in the case of having more sleep, the things that we've discussed so far is that the glymphatic system will transport more amyloid beta out of the brain. And we've talked about that with more sleep, there would be increased levels of melatonin, which we also know is preventing that amyloid beta from turning into the fibrils or the plaques. And so from both of these, both if there's more amyloid beta transported out of the brain, and if it's prevented from turning into the plaques, then we would have less plaques, and then we might think less Alzheimer's disease. And for all of this, we could think about sort of the opposite case where there's less sleep and think about the effects of that. So when there's less sleep, we would think that sort of the opposite would be happening. And that's that the glymphatic system is now transporting less amyloid beta out of the brain. So there's more of this protein in the brain in this case. Also, in the case of less sleep, there will be these decreased levels of melatonin. And with less melatonin, we would expect that this allows that amyloid beta to turn into the plaques or the fibrils more often. And so then it's all of this together is going along with the hypothesis that this paper presents, that is with having more sleep, then it's going to be preventing these plaques, and then also maybe preventing Alzheimer's.
다단다가 수고 대비게 가르치셨으면 다 연속살아 요비게 진천 데이터라 데이터 아니 그 수고 tonic number jurating gobada letter data assignment sathi gopigine tonte decisions.
So the information that's on the slide is coming from this paper, but I would still like for us to think about this for ourselves, think about, do we think this is enough information? Is this enough evidence? Is there a key piece of information that's missing?
한다단다 대기 니스데 상마 아니 심지그 정의 되는 렌지 스탠다드 데이터 타바이마이나 아니 거기 니스데 차 상마지 되면 되겠어요. 뭐라 대가면 가수자고야 당들도 도움이 되었어.
And even another way to think about this is to also consider, what else would you want to know to feel really certain about making a claim that sleep affects susceptibility to Alzheimer's disease?
다때가 삼례젠다치다라로 나가 속에 니당 아니게 아니 Alzheimer's 나찰라 슈친적으로서 대강라야 니 현다 하고 진행하는 오지라야 오해나서 대강라야 양 삼탕나 디코레스. Can I point out one thing? Because the errors are going all the same direction. I just, for this one, for the red ones on the left side, I think maybe it's better to have a cross on the two red lines.
Oh, you mean like an X on the red lines or something?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. So, right, it could be represented differently. Is here, you're right, the colors have significance. But yeah, so when it's a red arrow, that means sort of preventing, but so it could also be an X. Yeah, so like an X or preventing anytime that there's a red arrow. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know if we wanted to say it, because yeah, it's a good point. I actually didn't say the significance of the colors, so that is important to this to this diagram.
Yeah. Also, you have mentioned that with red less, but on the right side you have red, but it's causes, right?
So
for instance, less sleep, less melatonin, and less transportation. It doesn't, is also causes, but it's not prevent. You said red is not causing, prevent.
Right. Yeah. So when I think, maybe, and I'll kind of walk through the colors so that we can make sure everyone everyone gets the information as well. So just another feature of this diagram is that the colors, so the red and the green, do also have meaning. And so I'll focus in on a specific examples so that we can see the meaning here. If we start on this side where it says more sleep, and then with the green arrow going to increased levels of melatonin, this is showing that since it's green, it's saying like this is something that would be happening. So it's sort of like green for go. More sleep is then leading to increased levels of melatonin. And so it's the opposite if the arrow is red. So in this case, if more amyloid beta is leaving the brain, we would expect less plaques because the protein isn't there to make the plaques in the first place.
that the Nansing Tanda Marbo Tiki Noa Taku Shuchi Noa Trigger, but Tadanga Sugita, Amula Betam Marchi Yopatang, the melatonin Tishu Yopan Banakachigoresena, de la Tendi de Tirua, and a co any Kasuri Tandanga Su Tanika number Girati, Nyung Duris.
And it's the same thing with this red arrow here, is that the melatonin is preventing the amyloid beta from turning into these plaques.
Tanda Degeneration Tanda melatonin Tanda amyloid beta is a tonic and banjualing Gokuyo Pasongoris.
And so the two red arrows together are showing that there's two different ways that we can prevent amyloid plaques from forming. One is to transport amyloid beta out of the brain, which is here. And then the second one is to have melatonin prevent the formation. So it's just two different ways to prevent this formation.
The technique number, amyloid beta, the technique number, drawing Gopa and Kotabeni batteries, the Tamputin by Nangasugi. To go and Jeshumalone and amyloid beta the March in Chinarwa, Nuatilaya, any Tanda melatonin, amyloid beta, and co deal and drawing Gokuyorwa, co tonic number drawing Gokuyoris.
Yes, but so yes, that is a very good point, that the colors here do have meaning, and it could also be represented by an X or something blocking the plaque formation.
That did it. Tampo that Tandanga Sugi, Kola and Dato Tizugi, Sanchagi and Ontario, Stangi Tampo de Trade, that took some attention to that to see by Nangasun, that all the time by and Chagi Chigi, Namadu Song to us. Instabalaya, Yuan Shuk de Laya, and you could that Marpo and Yido, Tegalaya, Jupasija woman was, Kuchegi Marwas, but Instabalaya, Gelag Danda, then that thought and then that took some Tizu, we put something about the decisions. Or the other person that those she did and gala and in Merpuni Satigi, something let's take a message of Jamna degrees, in Ancient and that do Sionko, some Regina degrees.
So we have, well, a little less than 15 minutes, and I want to be sure I can hear from you. What do you think about this? What do you think about this hypothesis?
That and that Nasula Kama Jungali Nyons to Steve Baradela and Chetsugi Danda.
There's one question.
Did my wondering in Tiwastan Church. Tanda dish dog on the amyloid beta tika store. The solar Quinchenek and the digging on Chidang on Zola Subula Penton de Kayana Manas, digging on Zola Nonjichi Pento Yana Mana, and the Subu Chache, Leba Maimba Subu Chache Shimbata Sunu Yana Manas. Say that somebody did things all Pento Yang is remain his research.
At the moment, in the context, amyloid beta is kind of a really bad protein in our system. Is there any benefit that it has? Also, other question is like at the moment we talk about only in the brain, but is there in other part of the body is there amyloid beta?
Oh, okay. So yeah, these are two good questions. And yes, we have just been talking about the sort of negative effects of amyloid beta. It's this specific form. It's the plaque that cause the problem. So yes, amyloid beta does have a function that it needs to carry out. So it does need to be there. I would have to look it up to know what the function is. But yes, it's not that it's not totally bad. This is just in this specific case, especially when there's a formation of all of these plaques that can cause problems. But you know, it is there for a reason. It does carry out a function that's beneficial.
Tako ge chego tang antuk ge netan yores ne yores ta kangi bati musin desi jat kundusinga ge delaji ani chik chego yus sinji chigo yus ni bana yang tanda imale beta ge na ne yang ko ngu super ta tonic ngu nambala yu batte ge ni chunchi gro ma topi ani chitang ge bana imale beta ko yu ba ko ta namba senda ka chi ngu ga tizu gangla ya ko cheli chi dembi gani yores.
And now I'm curious, so I'll look it up and get back to you while you all discuss this question.
nga de ha ko ni to sens ne che su tan da ge zhuo chi dang de wa de ko le zhui de ji ka de la ya nga so ta thon ne ni ko ge la beta ge ani ko ge ginsen ka ri chi du ko ge je ko ka ri je le ka ri chi du de ta ge ins.
And so for this one, I want to hear from you about, yes, just what do you think about this hypothesis? So based on what we've learned so far, do you think that there is enough evidence to support this hypothesis? The hypothesis being that selection for short sleeping time in humans may have made humans more susceptible to Alzheimer's. And so for this one, we'll do it in 2 steps. First, I just want you to sort of vote with your cards. You can either say A for yes or B for no.
Ta tanda de nga su social de la sta ins ta tanda par ta nga su win su ko tro chi wa ne ta ke pa ta de ta la tem bai bai na ani ta wo ki social de la ya jap chu chu pa ta de ching dang gi du men du swa te re twa te re wa ta nga su social ka re se na ani thong thong khu bai bai na mi la ya sa mer ge ne de yong ha yo re swa o te res de ani ta chi khu ge pa ta de ti du men du se de ani de la ya pa ta dang yi ba du se na yes che men du se na bi che ani ko cha shi ni yes tang bo de la ya du tang men du yes no ge ani bi pen yes in a che no in a b.
I'll take a moment and then I can do a countdown and we'll see what you think.
De samlo tang te ji la tang ka ja ge ni ka ri sam ge pa na e sam ge na bi sam ge na tan ro chis.
All right, so I'm going to do the countdown. We've got 1, 2, 3. What do we think?
There's more yes than no.
Okay, more yes than no, but there's a mixture though.
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's take a moment and have everyone discuss. I think, especially if it's possible to have like a yes and a no, to have a little bit of debate between these two. Why do some of us think yes and why do some think no?
That is the digital cheese ro te la ya ka shi gi du se ro ka shi mi du se go ro ro le dulan chi de te ne ka sa kong su son ro chis.
we've got about 5 minutes left in class. So as you finish up your discussions, I wanted to return to Gaelic's question, and especially a big thank you to Dr. Shirley too in the chat. She sort of sent me some responses. Amyloid beta is, it has a role in neuronal growth and repair.
그래서 저도 저다 냠트 단다 단기 겐겔레기 기슬라기 주사지 저한테 답이 많네. 아무래도 배터기 아니 거기 젤레까지 도지래 서와 아니 저도 그 젤레데 내가 주고 원서 타지 아니 그 제주 제주 리페어 제주 뭐라 제주 제다 아니 그 철론 좀 하지 뭐라 어떻게 달라 그 젤렌도 도스.
So when it's in that diffuse form, it actually is really helpful, and we need to have it in our neurons. The trouble sometimes can happen as we get older, then we'll start to have problems with this protein.
다 당보데 그 diffuse forms나 그 참제 그 점비기네 발로 피캅스 다 그게 젤리티 제바다 아니 그 당아스도 gemba 차게 아니 그게 다그 강에 퇴지되다 아니 그거 역라도 주인 거레스.
And so I think we should have time. I'd like to hear from one yes and one no. So someone who agrees with this hypothesis and thinks we have enough evidence, and also someone who is saying no, we don't have enough.
다 미니라 코케트기 이 단계들라야 안톤 당니심바칭 도스 잡치치기 도스니 미치게 지셴다데 멘도스니 코케트기 이 준센성로지스 도 한번 도인다. Yes.
Yes. 루가 두바.
아주 나랑기 삼단은 answer the note 봐. 제가 김제 가르스는 알츠하이머 저도 하게 로다 거기 symptom들로 하게 숨준이 두셔 벌리도 하게 किसी दी तो न्यमशी चेला निगी शुगिन टिगी मुदले न्यमशी चे लो गिरिम शुज डोगो दागे मतलब गिरिम दिने रंबोला ताते चे काला खबर ठिंग दुगे चिक देरा चिक ngazo de lo chimbocha de ragen ta ngazo go ongbo gi chele nyamru rage de nyambe gimji gi ngazo gi ongbo kata ta ngazo ge lebe gi tusam dun zo kata nyamgu thgai de yin barage 김진기 라우다게 땅 니기 슈깅 틱들레테 칼라카버샤스긴 디 리서치엘라 아니 로 슈스 땅고도스라 그래서 땅고나 니지 로 투지 말레 버르 투지 든저 말레 버르 아니 쿠구도 쿠구미도스 미니로 따지시고다게 디 버르 가족이 대투고 말했으게
because I chose answer B, option B, no, because it takes a long time to study, because Alzheimer's disease develops in the later stage of life, and if you study like the sleep, you need to stay asleep for 30 or 60 years. It's impossible. One is that, and second is because of our because when people age, it definitely the brain function just decreases, and so there are problems, and we cannot say that that is because of sleep. Also, there are other possibilities, because that is brain functions also related with the aging as well.
Okay, yeah. So here we're thinking about there's some challenges to studying this, and also that there's a lot of factors to consider.
Tade tandade kapsechedo dela niki kangi kari pa tasidre ruchela ya ko kangi kari ruchi pa ta ane dela ya yan ko chen shenda ya mapu je supni tungu ruchi sens.
And then how about someone who said yes, and then we'll wrap up.
But yes, and it's good. Yes, thank you, Mambuyo.
Ruga Niba.
Okay. Actually, I was going to say no, but he already mentioned no. I would love to say yes. My point is changed. Actually, I think it's very impressive. This whole week's topic is the, how circadian rhythm is so important to the evolutionary, and how benefit of our sleep and so important. And the part of that reason reminded to me also one of our texts also says the sleep is so important in order to, enhance your body and keep maintain. That's also very important, I think. So in here is just come to here. I would see this is one of the great example of the why circadian rhythm is so important to our body and healthy condition in our mind, all of that. So here so that we can see easily how to melatonin and how much duration of sleep and correlated. So that's really clearly to shows, and I think it's very supportive to the what predict. So that I was going to say.
Tampungida means it was substandard, mean Lamich Johnson's by Insigins, Jinsekash Lavina, Tantanga Sid, and Tana Deshajan with Absalams, our pay our dishes. Tambudangas Lipu with Inzun Korlu, Korlugan, the Desham Stambala, the Nila Kasuke Chambuim, Tantella Tenengatsu, Zopogi, Tretentan, Zopogi, Tanyong, Nebula, Shikachaduchi, Chegi, Yemela Sukuman, putting us a tires. And Tim say, Nitandaim by Nangatsugi. Lipu with Tinzum conducted and the thing as ni any melatonin lo tanta ni queer general the data la shikin tambalaya any nate by bana ko tanda get toxigi ko chunditi bana de ngasu zupu nebab tong troten ta sam kan ta kam ta samag troten tane kishang by bana ne toxi data yapuchi ta ne ko chundi thamba chiri samgadus.
Great, yeah. Thank you for being willing to share both sides of the argument in this case. So I just think before we wrap up, potentially, I'm not sure, Jillian, I saw your video come on, so I don't know if you, and I know you had a couple of comments in the chat as well, especially for relating to this hypothesis and testing it. So maybe before we go, if you don't mind, you could say a little bit.
Yeah, I'm just very excited that you're talking about sleep. And we will continue on Friday exploring more neuroscience, but this is all connected. I did find a nice animal model study that gets around the length of time it takes to study a neurodegenerative disorder. As we age, humans live a longer life, but animal models give us an opportunity to study things, and even flies, which have a very short lifespan, we can look at circadian rhythms and we can learn a lot from these model organisms.
Tanda che suke ni ko jolang tinde yabo chig du tu che snga so za pasan les onde de ane avança sen ka pse ni tan devi ko mambo chig res ya mutu chim res ta che la ya dana nga suke chiga mi la ya tan de do to che la ju su jono bo go yo bai bai na ya chi so cha shen da na la ya tin chi ta chi de sa tin ju ko thong wi na la ya to se chi phya gi ya tin da ge zu tin da ya ko ni yo res ta ti ka pse ko so la ne chi Kutsugi da melatonin lo tang chiwarwa telatin de ani ni capulatin de ne wangsa nyamchung kan ru chin ru yo me ki toxite yo restim senga su flies and ta nga su ge dangbu yo ro dangbu na ne ba na toxite ge ni tang te yong dus tin tambala de da ne nga zu za pasan ne method wangsa sen ka pse ne mo to chi yes.
And then just last thing to mention as we prepare for tomorrow is that tomorrow you all will be doing your short presentations of part of the lesson plan that you've been developing this week.
산이 진짜로 산이 치수 공단이 쇼바로 산이 공단 진짜 값이 많이 치수에 단다게 된 tran데랑 라야 점생기 절고 지다리 지어와 어때는 진짜 나네 담치 지고 같이인스.
And so I think the graduate science instructors will give you a little bit more information. The idea, though, is that you'll have a short presentation and you'll choose just one part of your lesson plan. So you'll choose, for example, only to present about your activity or only to present about your assessment.
Tanda chitsula gigen tawala yom sana satona gigen chitsungu to this chigres tanda sani chitsungu tamchi chiyong we kapsu zo de 아니 지수 삼선 전국은 안에 접착이 진짜 깜찍고 그런 것도 지야스 지체 바이나 니 제국까지 듣고 있는데서 지금도 제제나 양고 제십제 직도 당하시고 어디 간다 로지 지금에서 들어도 아니 지금 제다 진짜 거라요 것도 지금 그래서
And this will be just so that we have time to hear from everybody and then also a little bit of time to discuss your lesson plans.
지하 진생까지는 아주 상하말라야 기지시에 국회 상하마게 고트에 국회 당 내디 제라야 양지수 주샤주기 무슨게 저거 거랑 아주 되도록 용하게 제대인스.
So I will just say thank you for sharing all of your ideas today. I hope that you get some sleep and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
나서 안에 들어 참하게 되듯이 하고 나서 되지 제스네 아니 지부 크로체스네 산인제요 되지